But first, this weekend will mark a full year since President Trump was inaugurated. It has been a week of good economic news, which he touted today, including the Dow Jones Industrial Average quickly cracking the 26,000 mark, and Apple announcing that it will bring huge overseas profits back to invest in the U.S., paying tens of billions of dollars in taxes. How much of that credit should go to the president? Our economics correspondent Paul Salman posed that question for his weekly series, Making Sense.
Unemployment 4.1%, down from 4.8% when President Trump took office. GDP growing at more than 3%, faster than the last two Obama years. The stock market hitting new highs nearly every day. And President Trump says it's a function of his policies. Here he is in Pennsylvania this afternoon.
At the center of America's resurgence are the massive tax cuts that I just signed into law, with tremendous tax relief for working families, for small businesses, for big businesses that produce jobs, for just about everybody. Tremendous numbers, and you're already seeing what's happening.
And so the question, does the president deserve the credit? At the annual economists convention in Philadelphia last week, I started with some of his toughest critics.
If you look at the trends of job creation, of growth of the economy, of the stock market's appreciation, there's not a very notable break on January 20th.
That's Austin Goolsbee from the Obama White House. Lisa Cook served there too.
We set in motion what we see now. You can't create an economy overnight.
Now, for the full-on defense of Trump's policies, we were trying to secure an interview with the head of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, Kevin Hassett. But though he was at the conference, no luck. So instead, we turned to longtime American University professor Bob Lerman.
On policy, I would give him maybe a B- to a B.
Lerman calls himself a moderate or market economist. He likes much of what Trump is doing for the economy.
I think the corporate reforms make sense. I think he's been pro-energy. Now, you can argue against it on environmental grounds, but I think that several steps will expand output in the energy field.
And that means jobs.
And that means jobs, and usually good jobs.
And how do the naysayers reconcile their low marks with a high-grade economy? Nonpartisan former International Monetary Fund chief economist Olivier Blanchard.
Other things are going on, which explain why the economy is doing well.
But what, besides momentum, are those other things? For the companies in the Standard & Poor's 500 stock index, says Blanchard, start with their earnings from elsewhere.
More than half from the S&P 500 actually come from outside the US. And the world is in much better shape. Europe is in much better shape than it was a year ago. The US stock market has done well because the rest of the world is doing well, because uncertainty in the rest of the world has decreased, and because of a tax cut. Because no matter what pre-tax profits you make, if you get a tax cut, you get more post-tax profits. But that's a key part of what Trump's taking credit for, that the tax cut has both spurred the stock market and will lead to more investment, more higher-paying jobs. More than 70 financial institutions, airlines, AT&T have announced employee bonuses or raises. Fiat Chrysler announced a $1 billion investment to build Ram trucks near Detroit, currently made in Mexico. Even Walmart hiked its minimum wage. But then Walmart is also closing 63 Sam's Club stores. So what matters is the net effect in the long run, argues Austin Goolsbee. Because in the nearer term, for individuals, say,
the tax bill is a small temporary cut to taxes for a small number of middle-class people and a very large permanent tax cut of high degree of windfall handout. It is not geared toward the people that elected Trump. This piling on of the continuing income inequality trends that have been there for a while. It's not as though President Trump created that. They've been going for decades.
Republicans, Democrats.
I just don't understand the argument that let's try to steer the tax code to pile on to the trends that have already been disturbing.
And here's another long-term negative, says libertarian economic historian Deirdre McCloskey. The president's aversion to trade.
Trashing the North American Free Trade Agreement, stopping the Trans-Pacific thing. All this is nuts from the economic point of view, in my opinion.
That's because to almost all economists, voluntary trade benefits sellers and consumers alike. As to Trump's trumpeting the liberating effects of deregulation, in the long run, Clinton advisor and Nobel laureate Joe Stiglitz asks,
why do we have these regulations? Because we want to breathe clean air. We want to be able to drink water. We want to be able to be sure that the food we're eating is safe. We don't want the banks to engage in the kind of risk-taking that put at risk our entire economy. The question is, what is the cost that we're going to be faced with stripping away the regulation?
So that's why you give the Trump administration such a low grade for its first year?
I think there are a lot of other things that disturb me even more. The long productivity of our society depends on science, innovation, research. And he's been slashing the research budget. Long term, to me, that is devastating.
and in addition to tax cuts, trade, deregulation, and science, what about the long-term cost of not building the infrastructure the president promised, says Professor Cook.
I really thought that we were going to invest in long-term growth, and I haven't seen that.
But the idea behind the tax bill is that companies will now invest in America as opposed to overseas.
Well, why not invest broadly in America through infrastructure? These coal jobs that possibly may never come back, what can take their place with the skills that the coal miners have? Construction, the building of bridges, the repairing of bridges. We still have the worst grade from the civil engineers with respect to infrastructure.
And finally, if that weren't enough piling on, what's the cost of increased uncertainty, Austin Goolsbee asks.
I took at face value the arguments made by the business community for at least half the Obama administration that the single worst thing that you could do to business formation and investment was to add uncertainty. There has, in modern memory, not really been a president who's added as much uncertainty, geopolitical uncertainty, regulatory, a whole bunch of policy uncertainty, more than what President Trump has.
But if uncertainty is so bad, how come consumer confidence is the highest it's been since the dawn of the millennium?
I was very uncertain as an economist about what would happen with the economy, but it seems as if consumers are able to divorce many of their concerns about America's political state from its economics.
Though he still worries about the long term, Ohio State economist Trevon Logan acknowledges the good economic news in the here and now. For example,
the numbers just released show that African-American unemployment is at its lowest rate ever, and white unemployment as well is at one of the lowest rates that it's ever been. So we're near full employment.
So then why so much negativity from economists?
I think in part because people have taken a very negative view of him personally.
You're a Republican?
She is, and Rhonda Sharp is also a president of the National Economic Association, founded in 1969 as the Caucus of Black Economists. Our last interviewee, she'd been listening to all the anti-Trump talk at the economic convention, and it worried her.
I think that he probably has the ability to reinvent himself in ways that we haven't seen other politicians. I think the big question is going to be which way that goes. And if folks who are very opposed to him will recognize that they have an opportunity potentially to influence some of that.
So are you worried that in kind of reflexively opposing him, people make it harder for him to change direction and be more bipartisan?
I think both the reflexive response to him not only makes it difficult for him, but I think it also makes it difficult for anyone who wants to be a part of that.
Part of the bipartisanship that Sharp, at least, thinks may still be possible. For the PBS NewsHour, this is economics correspondent Paul Solman reporting from Philadelphia.